Here is the strangest origin story in Hollywood history. A man is offered a role in a film. The role is the villain. He will travel to Rome, film a fight sequence in the Colosseum, and lose. Publicly, on camera, in front of every person who will ever watch the film. The man who defeats him will be the most technically brilliant martial artist in the world, performing at the peak of his abilities. In the film, he has written and directed specifically to showcase those abilities. The offer is not, by any conventional career calculation, a good one. Chuck Norris takes it anyway, and the sequence filmed in that Roman Colosseum in the winter of 1972. Two of the greatest martial artists who ever lived, performing at genuine intensity in one of the most iconic locations on Earth, becomes one of the most celebrated fight scenes in the history of cinema. Not because Chuck Norris won, because he was real. Because the camera, which cannot be deceived about these things, confirmed what the martial arts world already knew, that the man on the other side of Bruce Lee's kicks was not an actor pretending to be dangerous. He was dangerous, and losing to Bruce Lee in front of the world turned out to be the beginning of everything. But what came after, the decade of grinding, unglamorous work between the Colosseum and the first film that made America pay attention, is the part of the story that nobody tells. And it is the most important part. This is Episode 3. The door opened. Now comes the long walk through it. The flight to Rome in the winter of 1972 is Chuck Norris's first experience of the film world, and the film world is not immediately what he expected. He arrives in Italy as the world karate champion, a man at the absolute peak of a competitive career that has produced 6 consecutive titles and a reputation in the martial arts community that is unambiguous and complete. He is 31 years old, lean and precise, carrying the specific physical authority of someone whose relationship with his own body has been refined through a decade of the most demanding training available. He knows exactly what he is capable of. He has tested it against the best opposition the world has offered. What he has not tested is the camera. Bruce Lee has been living in the film world long enough to understand its specific demands, the way a sequence must be choreographed for visual clarity as well as martial authenticity, the adjustments that the camera's perspective requires, the timing that the edit will eventually impose on what is filmed as continuous action. He is directing Way of the Dragon himself, which means he controls everything. The script, the location, the choreography of every sequence, the specific vision of what the film needs to be, and how each element serves that vision. The Colosseum sequence is his centerpiece. He has planned it carefully. The location chosen for its symbolic weight, the choreography designed to display both fighters at their genuine level of ability, the specific arc of the fight built to honor the opponent even as it defeats him. Lee understands something that lesser action filmmakers miss. A villain who is genuinely formidable makes the hero's victory meaningful. A villain who is easily defeated makes the hero smaller. Chuck Norris in that Colosseum fighting at full intensity and losing by the narrowest possible margin serves Lee's film better than any technically inferior opponent could. They rehearse the sequence with the thoroughness that both men bring to everything they do seriously. The choreography is collaborative. Lee's vision, refined through conversation with Chuck about what is physically possible and what will read clearly on camera. Both men are accustomed to working at the level of genuine effort, and the rehearsal process pushes both of them. The sequence, by the time they film it, has been developed to a point where the camera is capturing something real rather than constructed. 2 skilled men moving at genuine intensity within a structure that gives the intensity shape and direction. The filming takes several days. The Colosseum is a complex location. The light changes constantly. The surfaces are uneven. The scale of the space creates acoustic and visual challenges that a studio environment would not present. Lee manages all of it with the specific combination of creative authority and practical problem solving that defines him as a filmmaker. Chuck adapts to each challenge with the same flexibility he brings to competitive fighting. Read the situation, adjust the approach, execute. The sequence is complete. Chuck flies home to California. Way of the Dragon is released in Hong Kong in December 1972 and in the United States in 1973. The Colosseum sequence receives the response that both men on some level must have anticipated. Audiences recognize immediately that what they are watching is different in kind from the manufactured action of conventional cinema. The fight is real. The technique is real. that two men are real. The specific authenticity that a decade of competitive martial arts produces in a performer's physical presence is visible to anyone watching, regardless of whether they can articulate what they are seeing. Chuck Norris, who went to Rome to lose, is noticed, and then Bruce Lee dies. The death of Bruce Lee in July 1973 sends a shockwave through the martial arts world that Chuck Norris experiences with the full force of personal loss. Lee is 32 years old. He is in the middle of completing Enter the Dragon, the film that will be released 1 month after his death, and will make him the most famous martial artist in history. He has been complaining of headaches. He takes a painkiller at a friend's apartment in Hong Kong. He goes to lie down. He does not wake up. The cause is cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain that the medical evidence will later link to a sensitivity to the medication's active ingredient. The specific cruelty of the timing, the greatest figure in martial arts cinema dying 1 month before the film that would have established his global dominance is released, is not lost on anyone who understood what Lee was in the process of building. Enter the Dragon arrives in theaters in August 1973 to the response that Lee had worked his entire career to earn. And he is not there to receive it. The martial arts community mourns with the specific intensity of a world that has lost its most visible and most gifted representative at the precise moment when the wider culture was finally ready to receive what he had to offer. The grief is real and widespread and carries within it the particular frustration of watching a talent extinguished before it could complete what it was building. Lee was not finished. Enter the Dragon was meant to be a beginning, not a capstone. The first in a series of films that would have established him as the dominant figure in a genre he was still in the process of inventing. What might have followed, nobody will ever know. For Chuck specifically, the loss carries an additional dimension that the public mourning cannot fully accommodate. He has lost not just a colleague or a professional connection, but the person who most completely understood what he was as a martial artist, who saw the specific quality of his ability and named it accurately at a moment when most of the world was not yet paying sufficient attention to confirm or deny the assessment. Bruce Lee's belief in Chuck Norris was not casual or calculated. It was the specific, honest evaluation of a practitioner whose own standards were absolute, extended to someone he regarded as a genuine peer. That kind of recognition lost at 32 does not simply transfer to the next available source. Chuck processes the loss in the way he processes everything difficult, by returning to the work. He trains, he teaches, he runs his schools. He does the daily practice of discipline that has been his response to adversity since the Korean dojang, and the practice does what it always does. It keeps him moving when stillness would mean being still in grief. But the professional question that Lee's death raises is real and unavoidable. The door that the Way of the Dragon appearance opened, the possibility of a film career, the visibility to a global audience that the Colosseum sequence produced, exists independently of the man who opened it. The question is what to do with it. Hollywood in the mid-1970s is watching the martial arts film genre with the calculated attention of an industry that has noticed a trend and is trying to determine whether the trend is a moment or a market. Bruce Lee's death has not killed the genre. If anything, the enormous posthumous success of Enter the Dragon has accelerated industry interest. The question Hollywood is asking is who fills the space Lee's death has created. Chuck Norris is one of the names being considered. The consideration is not straightforward. He is not, in the conventional Hollywood sense, an actor. His screen test results from the early 1970s are honest about this. The camera finds the physical authority, the genuine martial arts ability, the specific presence that combat training produces in a body. What the camera also finds is the stiffness of a man who has not yet learned to inhabit a character rather than performing one, who delivers lines with the specific awkwardness of someone whose entire training has been in the physical expression of technique rather than the verbal expression of emotion. Hollywood is patient with him in the way that Hollywood is patient with people whose physical presence is commercially valuable, which is to say, not very. He takes acting classes. He works with coaches. He understands, with the analytical clarity that has served him in every other context, that the gap between where he is and where a film career requires him to be is real and specific and addressable through the same process that addressed every gap in his martial arts development. Identify it precisely and work on it consistently until it closes. The acting classes are a particular kind of humility for a man who is, in his own domain, the best in the world. He sits in rooms with drama teachers whose knowledge of martial arts is non-existent and whose knowledge of performance is genuine, and he does the exercises they assign with the same absence of ego that he brought to the Korean dojang 20 years earlier. He is a student again, the specific discomfort of being a beginner at something, of being corrected on fundamentals by people who do not know your name and do not particularly care about your tournament record, is familiar to him from Korea, and he uses the familiarity to navigate the discomfort rather than resist it. He watches other actors. He studies the specific techniques of screen performance, the way the camera requires a different calibration of expression than live performance, the way stillness reads differently on film than it does in person, the way listening is as important as speaking in a scene that works. He applies the analytical method to acting that he applied to fighting. Watch the best. Identify what they are doing that he is not doing, and go back to work on the gap. The work is slow. The 1970s are years of effort and modest results. He makes films, low-budget action pictures that find small audiences and do not generate the kind of commercial success that produces the next bigger opportunity. He is not failing exactly. The films get made, they get released. They find the audiences that low-budget action films find. But he is not succeeding in the way that the Way of the Dragon appearance suggested might be possible. He does not quit. The Oklahoma boy who lost tournaments before winning them applies the same logic to Hollywood. The losses are data, the data informs the work, and the work eventually produces the result. The turning point arrives in 1977 with Breaker, Chuck's first leading role in a low-budget action film about a truck driver searching for his missing brother. The film is not good. This can be said honestly and without diminishing what it represents in the arc of Chuck Norris's career, which is the moment when a film camera was pointed at him as the primary subject rather than a supporting one, and when the audience that would eventually define his career got its first clear look at what he was. What they saw was specific and limited and the beginning of something. The character, a physically capable, morally direct, practically problem-solving American male who responds to injustice with decisive physical action, is the template that every subsequent Chuck Norris film will refine and develop, but never fundamentally alter. The execution in Breaker is rough. The acting is uneven. The production values are what the budget permits, but the physical performance is real. And the character is real in the specific sense that the values driving him, loyalty, justice, the willingness to take personal risk in defense of people who need defending, are the values that Chuck Norris actually holds. He is not performing a character whose worldview he has adopted for the sake of the role. He is playing a version of himself, and the authenticity that produces is visible even through the rough edges of the execution. Good Guys Wear Black arrives in 1978 and refines what Breaker roughed out. Chuck plays John T. Booker, a Vietnam veteran whose team was betrayed and who discovers, years after the war, that the betrayal went all the way to the top of the American government. The film is low budget and imperfect, and it performs significantly better than anything Chuck Norris has previously made, finding an audience that the martial arts community had been building toward for years, and that is now large enough to register commercially. The Vietnam dimension is not accidental. It is the key that unlocks Chuck Norris's specific cultural relevance in a way that pure martial arts action alone could not produce. The United States in the late 1970s is a country carrying the unresolved weight of Vietnam, a war that ended in a way the country has not found a language to process, that produced veterans who came home to a reception that ranged from indifference to hostility, that left a wound in the American sense of itself that the subsequent years have not healed. The specific American story of military competence and political betrayal, of soldiers who fought well and were failed by the institutions that sent them, is a story that resonates with enormous emotional force in a country still trying to understand what happened in Southeast Asia. Chuck Norris, in Good Guys Wear Black and in the films that follow it, tells that story with his body. His characters are Vietnam veterans. They are skilled, disciplined, loyal, and capable of decisive action. They are failed by politicians and bureaucracies and institutional cowardice, and they respond to the failure by doing themselves what the institutions would not do. They win. The audience that responds to this is not responding to fantasy. They are responding to something they need. A version of the American military story that ends differently from the way it ended in reality, told by a man who is genuinely what his characters claim to be. A veteran, a martial artist, a person whose physical capability is real rather than manufactured. Chuck Norris becomes, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the action hero of a specific American wound. Missing in Action arrives in 1984 and is the film that completes the transformation from martial arts star to American cultural symbol. The premise is the specific fantasy of a generation of Americans who cannot let Vietnam go. An American POW, abandoned by the government, escapes and rescues the men left behind. Colonel James Braddock, Chuck's character, is the embodiment of everything that the real Vietnam story denied its participants. He is competent where the command structure was not. He is loyal where the politicians were not. He does not accept the lie that the prisoners were left behind, and he does not ask permission from the institutions that failed them before going to get them back. The film opens #1 at the box office. It is a commercial phenomenon, not because it is a great film, but because it arrives at a moment when the specific emotional need it addresses is enormous. And Chuck Norris is the specific person whose credibility makes the fantasy feel earned rather than manufactured. Ronald Reagan, whose presidency is built in significant part on the rehabilitation of American military confidence after Vietnam, is a fan. The cultural alignment between the Reaganite restoration of American strength and the Chuck Norris action hero, the veteran who wins the war the country lost, is not subtle. It is the most direct possible expression in popular culture of a specific political and emotional moment. Chuck is aware of the dimension, but not calculating about it. He is not a political strategist. He is a man who makes films about the values he actually holds: loyalty, justice, the protection of the vulnerable, the willingness to act when institutions will not. And who has found, in the America of the early 1980s, an audience whose need for exactly those values is at its most acute. The veterans who write him letters during this period are the most important correspondents of his film career. They are not writing to a movie star. They are writing to someone who represents something they experienced and that the country has not adequately acknowledged. The competence, the sacrifice, the specific dignity of soldiers who fought well in a war that the political class managed badly. They tell him what his films mean to them. They tell him that watching Colonel Braddock go back and win is the closest the culture has come to saying what they needed to hear. Chuck reads every letter. He does not delegate this. The connection between his films and the people they most directly serve is not an abstraction to him. It is the specific human face of what the work is for, and he treats it with the seriousness it deserves. He responds where he can. He meets veterans at events and screenings with the specific attention of a man who understands that what they are bringing to him is not celebrity worship, but genuine, personal gratitude for something that mattered to them in ways that a film critic's vocabulary cannot adequately evaluate. He understands something about his audience that Hollywood does not always understand about its most commercially successful artists, that the relationship is real, that the people buying the tickets are not passive consumers of a product but participants in a transaction that means something to them, and that the obligation runs both ways. The films accumulate. Delta Force in 1986, Invasion USA in 1985, Code of Silence in 1985, each one finding the same audience with variations on the same essential story. The Cannon Films partnership with producers Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus produces films with the industrial efficiency of a studio that has identified a formula and is committed to running it at maximum output. Behind the camera, Chuck is the same man he has always been. Disciplined, professional, the person on set who is always prepared and never late, and never the source of the drama that film productions generate in such reliable abundance. The crew notices. The directors notice the specific quality of a person whose work ethic is total and whose ego is genuinely modest produces a working environment that people want to return to. And the people who make films with Chuck Norris tend to make more than one. By the mid-1980s, he is the biggest action star in America. Not the most acclaimed, the critical establishment has never found a way to take seriously what his films are actually doing, which is telling a specific American story for a specific American audience with a specific American sincerity that the critical vocabulary of the era is not well equipped to evaluate, but the most commercially successful, the most watched, the most reliably connected to the audience that keeps coming back. The Boy, from Ryan, Oklahoma, who lost tournaments before winning them, who was rejected by Hollywood before it needed him, who flew to Rome to lose to his best friend and ended up being seen by the world, is the biggest action star in America. Bruce Lee saw it first. He saw it from the other side of a fight sequence in the Colosseum 11 years before Missing in Action opened at #1 and understood what the camera was going to confirm. He was right. Episode 4, Missing in Action, Reagan's America. The action hero is national symbol, when the private man behind the public icon, building something in his personal life that the films could never quite capture. This is Legends of America.